Okay, so let's take a look at yet another example where we might want to read from a document as opposed to write to a document. So, and we'll also take a look at a little more complex example where this is a nested set of pieces of data, right? This is a section containing multiple students. Right? In the previous one, it was just a list of students. Right? This is going to be a section that contains a list of students. So it's a nested element. So this is the students, notice that it's a child collection, right, as opposed to just a data type, a primitive data type, right? It's a complex data type, which is a list of students. So this is a little more involved example, and here we're annotating that the students is going to be an element, so it's going to have a section, and then underneath it's going to have students, and then the student is going to have a list of students, right? So it's more complex. So here we're instantiating a couple of students, Alice and Bob. We're adding it to a collection, an array list in this case. We're adding Alice and Bob, and then we instantiate a brand new section and set the students to the student list. So basically, it's an object section that contains a collection of students. Yes, and we want to write this or read this from XML. Okay, so we're going to write. To oh, okay. The previous one was writing a single instance object. This is writing a list of objects, so it's a more complex example. All right, excellent. So we instantiate the section. We create the marshaller. So it's the same thing that we did before, and in this case we are writing an entire section that contains these two students, Bob and Alice. And the output comes out to be this. We have section, and then we have students 1, 2, 3, Alice, and Bob. Right? Now you can configure it to either be either just plain old section with each individual instance of students, or you can have a list of students that can contain many instances of students inside of it. Here we have it that notice that it's students, and notice that it's capitalized. And that's based on the name of the attribute. The name of the attribute was a collection of students. So it's taking the name of the field literally, to create the instances of these elements. So here's an example where you would override that. It says, do not use the default name, because in Java it makes sense that it's called students and it's capitalized. But when it's written to the XML instances, a preferable name that this would be singular. Right, and not plural. Yes? Same thing like in when you're mapping classes to tables. Same thing. Right? When you in Java, classes are typically singular. Right? It's a student, it's a section, right? It's a course. But when you map them to a table, the table typically you would want it to be plural. Right? Because the table, it would list its rows or records of multiple students or multiple courses. Right? So typically you would override the default name of the table to be pluralized as opposed to singular. Make sense? Again, yet another naming convention difference between these two infrastructure. Yes?
Can there be a student's element node to wrap up those students?
Yeah, you would have to configure it to say that you wanted a separate students. Yep. Yeah, you can configure it to be that way. Yep. So here's an example, identical example, but using movies as an example. Just adding two movies and writing it out to a list of movies. So reading, the only difference in reading is that instead of using the marshaller, right, like we mentioned earlier, you would use an unmarshaller, right, and it would take as arguments as an input an XML document, right, and it would spit out on the other end an instance Java object. Okay, so in this case, it's the students .class, and here you have is it students? I forget. Did I call it students with an S? Oh, I forget. So here we create the unmarshaller, the unmarshal takes as argument the file that you're reading from, right, and it instantiates a new object of the type of whatever you want to cast it to. Okay, so again, you can go both ways, from Java to XML, or from XML back to Java. And here's an example of unmarshalling movies. All right, let's talk about XSLT.